The Hollywood Reporter did an interview with Steve Asbell, the head of 20th Century Studios. In it, they asked him about Kingsman prequels and sequels, and he simply stated that there's no plans on doing any anytime soon. As someone who started paying close attention to the work of Kingsman director Matthew Vaughn, particularly after Argylle this year, this didn't exactly come as a surprise to me. But the expansion of the Kingsman IP after the first film wasn't always such an odd idea. In this video, we will explore each Kingsman film and the pseudo spin-off Argylle, all of which are directed by Matthew Vaughn, and three of which are co-written by Matthew Vaughn, in order to explore how a once promising IP crashed and burned. All of the sources will be linked in the description box below, and this is your one and only spoiler warning. Kingsman is one of those franchises where when you watch the first film of the series, you absolutely understand why more films were made. Its first film, Kingsman: The Secret Service, is really as good as its dedicated fans claim that it is. It's a highly stylized, highly violent, highly technological, and very off-kilter 007 pastiche. When I first saw the film, what stuck out to me was its strange shock humor, its colorization, its special effects, and what felt like a fresh new take on spy technology. As a spoof, the first Kingsman film really makes me think of earlier film entries of Roger Moore's James Bond. Honestly, Kingsman: The Secret Service takes everything that we love about spy thrillers and blends a comedic irony with action in a way that pulls you in and makes you invest in the characters, feel the satisfaction of their victories, and leaves you wondering how its writing, direction, and everything else managed to take everything that you know about spy thrillers and turn them into something surprising. If you watch the first Kingsman film, you will appreciate that whilst it can stand alone, if there is more where that came from, there is merit in there being more films. And yet, well, the more that this franchise gave, the more that it strayed from its most interesting elements. I don't even mean that in the sense of audiences expect to see XYZ and they were not given that, although that happened. I don't even mean that the issue is that the subsequent sequel and prequels strayed too far from the comics, although I do not particularly oppose that argument either. What I mean is that the first film was culturally relevant with a high impact style that heightened its commentary on environmentalism, celebrity, power, and class. Its weakest moments still left room for discussion on the spy genre itself, why the genre is so loved, the genre's tendency to use ableism as a shorthand for villainy, whether certain gags actually work effectively as trope subversions. It's interesting. It's high risk, high reward. It's campy and strange, with a cast that's a good mix of big time A-listers and practical nobodies. Love it or hate it, you will probably take something interesting from watching it. And by the way, I researched on why the character Gazelle was wearing running prosthetics when the actress is not disabled, and apparently they originally cast a woman with prosthetic legs, but she dropped out for whatever reason, and then they ended up casting a dancer and adding the prosthetics digitally. But they had originally considered Oscar Pistorius for the role, and I found this page on IMDb with Kingsman trivia that states that not only was Oscar Pistorius offered the role, but that later on when he was convicted of homicide, Gazelle was depicted killing someone by shooting them through a door in the way that he apparently had. The context explains the other déclassé decisions that would be made in later installments of the Kingsman franchise, because before, whilst the framing of creating an iconic disabled character with a non-disabled actress is a bit shaky, but this coincidence just doesn't help Matthew Vaughn's argument. As for trope subversion, don't let Matthew Vaughn hear you questioning his approach, especially to writing and directing female characters, lest you become one of the bloody wokists that just don't get him. Matthew Vaughn being unlikable aside, Kingsman: The Secret Service is solid and interesting, offering something into the spy genre And everyone from the costume designers to the art directors to the sound department to the special effects team were all clocked in on this movie. You saw where every cent of that $81 million budget went. Everyone on that set committed to its grand vision, and the execution was nearly flawless. And then it was all kind of downhill from there. Slowly at first, and then rapidly. Enter Kingsman: The Golden Circle, the direct sequel. It's okay. It kind of gets worse when you put it in the context of the franchise's narrative. Let me start with what I liked. I like that a lot of the visual style and flair is still there. I like that the familiar high-tech gadgets from the previous film made an appearance. I like that the shooting was impeccable. I like that the idea of the villain was interesting. And I like that the cast did the best that they could with what they were given. Pedro Pascal, Halle Berry, and Channing Tatum gave performances that have inspired sounds that go viral on social media constantly. But it's so bloated and convoluted. It relies on shock value for shock value's sake. It retcons characters that audiences know and love with no clear justifications for this choice. The humor feels like being stuck at a comedian's self-righteous post-cancellation apology tour instead of actually just being funny. The twists and turns are sloppy, and worst of all, it still manages to be fucking boring. This is a wild feat. To have all of these subplots and grand ideas and a cast that can pull them off, and then not even be a fraction as bold, brave, or interesting as the previous film. And yet these are the same people that wrote the first film, Matthew Vaughn included, so we know the skill set is there. Frankly, I am not even unwilling to accept the plot line about someone being back from the dead / someone not dying. I am capable of suspending my disbelief, but it does take some of the emotional gravitas of the first film away. Golden Circle has none of the commentary, imagination, or no-holds-barred approach that made its predecessor so beloved and so popular. It just takes the superficial motifs of the first film and considers that adequate for a follow-up. So even though you can argue that it is an okay film, it's such a bummer as a follow-up. The best part of Kingsman: The Golden Circle isn't even Kingsman: The Golden Circle at all. It's just this crossover clip with Archer that was written by Matt Mostrenbacher. The next franchise installment isn't downhill in the way that you might expect, but make no mistake, we're definitely on the leisurely promenade downhill. Enter the prequel, The Kingsman. This film is described as taking place when a collection of history's worst tyrants and criminal masterminds gather to plot a war to wipe out millions, and one man must race against time to stop them. In this prequel, the audiences discover the origins of the very first independent intelligence agency, i.e. the Kingsman Agency. There's a lot of talk about The Kingsman as a box office failure, but it was released in 2021, so I don't think that the box office itself is all that revealing about the state of the franchise. What I think is revealing is the decision to do a prequel at all and focus that prequel on real people and real events instead of fictional villains and fictional events. The film desperately wants to be high-minded and absurd, with real commentary and high-octane humor. What it really is tonally misguided gauche good old days nostalgia that overestimates its capacity to both deliver on campy theatrical and borderline surreal comedy and solemn serious historical scenes and imagery. There is also a lot going on with a satirical take on Scottish separatists, where there is a sort of criminal organization led by a Scotsman, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, which is largely responsible for World War I. Oh, and there's a mid-credits scene of Hitler and Lenin meeting. Ralph Fiennes did his best, though. Bless his heart. Everything about The Kingsman just makes you want to sigh. No one asked for a prequel, and then this was the prequel that was released. And if you go into the extent to which you're supposed to take this film and indeed this franchise seriously, it all feels so much worse, regardless of which side you would fall on. Because why is this happening right now? Whilst The Kingsman is arguably the most egregious part of the whole franchise, there's actually one last film to discuss, because said film was confirmed to be in the same universe as the Kingsman film. Enter Argylle. In Argylle, which came out earlier this year, a young Aubrey Argylle is shown walking into a bar that's called the Kingsman to pick up a package, which is then revealed to be a gun. This credits scene shows that the Kingsman agency has more business operations and coverage than was previously known. It also alludes to some kind of relationship between Aubrey Argylle and the Kingsman agency. I won't get into Argylle too much because I already complained extensively about not liking it in a different video, and at the time I didn't even know that it was in the same universe as the Kingsman films. So, anyways, what I think should be noted about Argylle in the greater context of the Kingsman franchise is that Matthew Vaughn and perhaps some of his collaborators have this bad habit of having grand visions that they do not commit to executing properly. Whilst he didn't write Argylle, the film has all of the hallmarks of his worst creative instincts and none of his inspired stylization. Bloat, excessive parody, lack of balance and tone shift, and a failure to properly flesh out ideas from point A to point B all make up the script in this film. There seems to be something of a formula here that Matthew Vaughn has yet to perfect, and as a result, all of the potentially interesting elements of Argylle, including its tie-in book for marketing and indeed the Kingsman sequel and prequel, are mishandled. There are ideas, he and his collaborators just don't seem to know what to do with them. The potential that could have been realized if the execution was better with this franchise is how people have continued to hang on to Matthew Vaughn's words on the next Kingsman film that at this point may find a new home elsewhere given the lack of plans from 20th Century Studios. Or maybe they'll release something. I don't know. I don't work in Hollywood. That first Kingsman film was really something special, flaws and all. And Matthew Vaughn seems to think so too. Many are speculating about where the franchise goes from here, but perhaps it's time to give up the ghost. Perhaps what made that first film so special was that it had not yet become a formula, and instead it was risky. It was a risky bet that enthralled us with a self-contained story, and we were greedy for more. The mark of a great film isn't its capacity to be exploited for franchises. It's its story, its style, its use of technology, its use of sound, its texture, its place in the larger cultural zeitgeist. Maybe Secret Service should have been the first and last Kingsman entry. Or maybe Matthew Vaughn wasn't the right director or writer for its follow-ups. Whatever the case may be, sometimes you don't need to keep the party going. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe, comment your thoughts on the state of the Kingsman franchise, and if you hated this video, before you do anything, remember,
manners maketh man.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out where to shoehorn this in, but I too can have grand ideas that are poorly executed and don't stick the landing.